a school bus driver began noticing a young girl quietly crying every afternoon on his route, her behavior growing more concerning as the days passed. One day, after the drop-offs, he decided to investigate and looked under her seat. And what he discovered made him gasp. Walter Harmon adjusted his rearview mirror with a practiced flick of his wrist as the rumbling school bus made its way down the suburban streets of Willow Glen, Illinois. At 62, the retired mechanic had found an unexpected second career as a school bus driver, a job that gave his days structure and purpose after 35 years of fixing engines and transmissions. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the blue-gray seats. Walter glanced at his watch, 3:45 p.m., right on schedule for the afternoon drop-offs. Most of the students from Willow Glen Intermediate School chatted animatedly about weekend plans, upcoming tests, or the latest social media drama. The usual cacophony of adolescent life filled the bus, but as Walter checked his mirror again, his gaze landed on a girl sitting alone near the front. She sat just 3 seats back in the row directly above the air vent, her face partially hidden by strands of brown hair. Her shoulders were hunched forward, and though she tried to hide it, Walter could see her hand occasionally coming up to wipe away tears. This was the 3rd day in a row he had noticed her crying, always in the same pattern, quiet and reserved when the bus was full, gradually letting her guard down as students departed at their stops. Walter frowned, concern etching deeper lines into his weathered face. He had been driving this route long enough to recognize the signs of a troubled kid. Looking down at his clipboard where he kept the student roster, he confirmed what he already knew. Her name was Rory Carson, Class 9B. She had only been enrolled at Willow Glen for 2 weeks. The first week, Walter hadn't thought much of her quiet demeanor. New students often kept to themselves until they found their footing. But this second week had shown a disturbing pattern, and today seemed particularly bad. 5th Street coming up, Walter called out as he slowed for the stop. 2 boys grabbed their backpacks and made their way to the front, thanking Walter as they stepped off the bus. He watched them walk toward their homes before closing the door and continuing on his route. With each stop, the bus grew emptier, and Walter continued stealing glances at Rory through his mirror. There were only 5 students left now, and Rory's stop was the last on his route. As the bus emptied further, her silent tears became more evident. At one point, Walter noticed something peculiar. As he navigated a turn, Rory suddenly slouched forward, her hand disappearing beneath the seat. Walter couldn't see clearly what she was doing. He needed to keep his eyes on the road, but it appeared she was examining the air vent under the seat. A metallic clang echoed through the now quiet bus. "Everything all right back there?" Walter called, concerned. Rory's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Yes," she said quickly, her voice barely audible. "Sorry, I dropped my tissue." Walter nodded and returned his attention to the road, but something felt off. He drew a long, contemplative breath. Yesterday, he had tried to strike up a conversation with the girl, asking about her classes and how she was settling in, but she had offered only one-word responses before retreating back into silence. After dropping off the remaining students, Walter finally approached Rory's stop, a modest 2-story house with faded blue siding at the end of Maple Drive. As he pulled the bus to a stop, Walter made a decision. He couldn't just ignore what he was seeing day after day. "Last stop," he announced, opening the door. Rory gathered her pink backpack and stood, her movements sluggish. As she passed Walter, he noticed her red-rimmed eyes and the dark circles beneath them. "Have a good evening, Rory," he said with a gentle smile. She nodded without making eye contact and stepped off the bus. To her visible surprise, Walter followed her, stepping down onto the sidewalk. "Why are you following me?" she asked, her voice tinged with alarm. Walter held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I can't help but notice you've been upset on the bus lately," he said. "It's happened several times now. I just wanted to make sure with your parents that everything's okay." Fear flashed across Rory's face, though she quickly tried to mask it. "No need for that," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "It's nothing big. School's just been hard, and I miss my friends from my previous school." Walter studied her face, uncertain. His decades of life experience told him there was more to the story, but he didn't want to push too hard and scare her. "I understand," he said, "but sometimes it helps to—" The front door of the house swung open suddenly, cutting him off. A man stepped out onto the porch, his expression impassive. "Rory," he called sharply, "come inside." Rory shot Walter a look that seemed almost pleading before rushing toward the house. Her footsteps hurried across the concrete walkway. The man's attention turned to Walter. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone neutral but somehow unwelcoming. Walter hesitated for a moment before deciding to approach. He walked up the path toward the porch, stopping a respectful distance away. "No problem, sir," Walter said. "I'm Walter Harmon, Rory's bus driver. I just wanted to check in because I've noticed she seems upset on the ride home lately." The man's expression didn't change. "I'm Greg Whitmore, Rory's stepfather," he said. "Her mother isn't home right now." Walter nodded. "I just wanted to let you know that Rory's been crying on the bus. I was concerned something might be troubling her." Greg's face softened slightly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Her grandmother passed away recently," he explained. "It's been hard on all of us, but especially on Rory. They were close. She'll get over it, hopefully." "I'm very sorry to hear that," Walter said, feeling a twinge of relief that there was an explanation. "Please accept my condolences. I didn't mean to intrude." "Thanks," Greg said, already turning away. "Have a good day." Before Walter could finish wishing them a good evening in return, the door closed with a decisive click. Walking back to his bus, Walter couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. The stepfather's explanation made sense, but something about his demeanor felt off. There was no trace of grief in his voice when he mentioned the grandmother's death, and he had seemed awfully quick to dismiss Walter. "Maybe I'm overthinking it," Walter muttered to himself as he climbed back into the driver's seat. Man could just be busy or private. Still, as he started the engine and pulled away from the curb, the image of Rory's pleading look stayed with him. Walter drove the bus back to the station, navigating the familiar streets on autopilot while his mind remained preoccupied with Rory. The afternoon sun was beginning to descend, casting long shadows across the neighborhood as he pulled into the school bus depot. After parking in his designated spot, Walter began his end-of-day routine. He walked the length of the bus, checking each seat for forgotten items and collecting the inevitable assortment of trash, crumpled homework assignments, empty chip bags, and half-finished water bottles. He placed each item into the garbage bag he always kept on hand, moving methodically from the back of the bus toward the front. When he reached the front seats, Walter paused. This was where Rory had been sitting, right above the air vent. He recalled the clang he'd heard and her hurried explanation about dropping a tissue. Looking at the seat now, he realized he hadn't seen her with any tissues when she left the bus. Maybe she'd put it in her pocket, but Walter's instincts told him to investigate further. He crouched down, his knees protesting with a dull ache. The floor around the seat appeared clean, no tissues or obvious debris. Walter's attention turned to the air vent itself. It was securely fastened to the floor, but as he examined it more closely, he noticed a small gap between the vent and the seat base. "Let's see what we have here," he murmured, reaching his fingers into the narrow space. His fingertips brushed against something smooth and unfamiliar. With some effort, Walter managed to extract a small plastic package. When he pulled it out into the light, his breath caught in his throat. It was a blister pack of pink pills, partially used. Walter turned it over in his hand, studying the unfamiliar medication. The brand name was printed on the back, along with dosage information. What in the world? Walter pulled out his phone and quickly searched for the drug name online. His eyes widened as he read the search results. They were pregnancy prevention pills. Birth control. Walter sat heavily in the driver's seat, staring at the package in his hand. A 14 or 15-year-old girl was hiding birth control pills under her seat on the school bus. Combined with her crying and withdrawn behavior, it painted a concerning picture. Walter took several photos of the pills with his phone, carefully documenting what he'd found and where. Then he tucked the pills into his waist bag, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This wasn't something he could ignore. With slightly trembling fingers, Walter located the principal's contact information in his phone and attached the photos to a message. Found these hidden under a seat on my bus today. They belong to a student. Please advise on next steps. After sending the message, Walter waited a moment, but no immediate response came. Growing increasingly anxious, he decided to call the principal directly. After 3 rings, a terse voice answered. "This is Principal Daniels." "Hello, sir. This is Walter Harmon, bus driver for Route 14. The principal's sigh was audible through the phone. "Mr. Harmon, I'm currently in a meeting with the school board. Is this urgent?" "I believe it is, sir. I just sent you some photos." "I haven't had a chance to check my messages," Principal Daniels cut in, his voice strained with impatience. "How important could it be that it can't wait until after my meeting?" Walter hesitated, unsure how much to say over the phone. "I found something concerning on the bus that belongs to one of your students. I think you should take a look as soon as possible." "I'll look at whatever you sent after my meeting," the principal responded, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. "I don't like to be disturbed unless there's a genuine emergency." The call ended abruptly, leaving Walter staring at his phone in frustration. He had expected more urgency from the principal, especially given the nature of his discovery. "Guess I'll have to handle this myself for now," Walter muttered, pocketing his phone and gathering his belongings. Walter returned the bus key at the station office, clocked out, and headed to the parking lot where his old Buick waited. The car had seen better days. The blue paint was fading, and there was a persistent rattle in the engine, but it had been with him for 15 years and still ran reliably enough. As he pulled out of the station, Walter's mind churned with indecision. He knew his route home would take him right past Rory's house. Part of him felt compelled to stop there again, to show the stepfather what he'd found and ensure the girl was safe. But the memory of Greg Whitmore's dismissive attitude gave him pause. "Maybe he doesn't even know," Walter reasoned aloud as he drove. "Could be the girls taking them in secret." He passed the turnoff to Maple Drive, where Rory's house stood, then slowed his car, conscience nagging at him. After a moment's hesitation, he made a U-turn at the next intersection and headed back. Pulling up in front of the modest blue house, Walter took a deep breath to steady his nerves. He wasn't looking forward to another interaction with Greg Whitmore, but his concern for Rory outweighed his discomfort. He approached the door and knocked firmly. No response came. He waited a reasonable interval before knocking again, this time a bit louder. Still nothing. Walter peered through the front window. The house was dark inside, no signs of movement or life. It appeared no one was home, despite it being less than an hour since he'd dropped Rory off. Returning to his car, Walter pulled out the emergency contact list he kept for all the students on his route. He located Rory's information and found the contact number listed under Greg Whitmore's name. He dialed the number, but after several rings, it went to voicemail. "Strange," Walter muttered, hanging up without leaving a message. Where could they have gone so quickly? With a sigh, he started his car again and continued his journey home. He had done what he could for now. Perhaps the principal would call him back soon, or he could try contacting Rory's family again later. Walter had driven only a few miles when he spotted a familiar figure emerging from the pharmacy on Cedar Street. It was Rory, walking alone. She looked miserable, one arm wrapped around her stomach, as if in pain. Without thinking twice, Walter pulled over to the curb and got out of his car. "Rory?" he called softly, not wanting to startle her. The girl looked up, surprise and wariness crossing her face when she recognized him. She stopped walking, but maintained her distance. "Are you all right?" Walter asked, noticing her pallid complexion. "You look like you're in pain." "I'm fine," she said flatly, though her posture suggested otherwise. Walter glanced around. "Where's your stepfather? Did he drop you off here?" "That's not your business," Rory replied, her voice hardening. "What do you want from me?" Walter raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture. "I'm just concerned about you, that's all. I've been driving school buses for years, and I can tell when a student is having a tough time." Rory shifted uncomfortably, clutching her stomach tighter. "I said I'm fine. Please leave me alone." Before Walter could respond, a middle-aged couple walking past slowed their pace, looking between him and Rory with concern. "Everything okay here?" the man asked, directing the question to Rory. The girl hesitated, then said in a quiet voice, "He scares me." The couple immediately stepped between Walter and Rory, their posture protective. "Sir, I think you should leave," the woman said firmly. Walter felt his face flush with embarrassment and frustration. "I'm her school bus driver. I was just checking if she needed help." "She clearly doesn't want your help," the man replied. "Move along before we call the police." Seeing no way to explain himself without making the situation worse, Walter reluctantly returned to his car. As he pulled away from the curb, he glanced in his rearview mirror and saw that the couple had already continued walking, leaving Rory alone once again. He slowed his car, watching as Rory suddenly bent over a nearby garbage bin and retched violently. "Something is very wrong here," Walter muttered, feeling increasingly troubled. His first instinct was to call the police, but what would he tell them? That a girl said she was scared of him? That he found birth control pills and now she was throwing up? He had no concrete evidence of any immediate danger, and involving the authorities without talking to the parents first could create unnecessary problems. Walter decided to keep an eye on Rory from a distance. He parked his car across the street, feeling uncomfortable about essentially stalking a young girl, but convinced that his intentions were pure. If he saw anything truly alarming, he would intervene. From his vantage point, Walter watched as Rory composed herself and walked unsteadily toward a small liquor store at the end of the block. She disappeared inside, and Walter waited, occasionally checking his phone for any response from the principal. After about 10 minutes, movement at the store caught Walter's attention. Rory emerged, but she wasn't alone. Greg Whitmore followed her out, turning to lock the door behind him and flip the sign from open to closed. Walter realized that Greg must own or work at the liquor store, explaining why he hadn't been home earlier. The two walked to a sedan parked nearby. Through his car window, Walter observed Greg hand something to Rory to drink. From this distance, he couldn't tell if it was alcohol or something innocent, like water or soda. The girl took it without enthusiasm, keeping her gaze downward. Walter's finger hovered over the emergency call button on his phone. Should he call the police? What if he was overreacting and there was a perfectly innocent explanation for everything he'd seen? But what if he wasn't and Rory was in real danger? As he debated with himself, Greg's car pulled away from the curb. Making a split-second decision, Walter started his engine. He would follow them just to make sure Rory was safe, and meanwhile keep trying to reach someone in authority who could help. As Walter followed Greg's sedan at a discreet distance, he racked his brain for other ways to help Rory. The principal hadn't responded to his message, but perhaps there was someone else at the school he could contact. With one eye on the road ahead, Walter scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Rory's homeroom teacher, Ms. Margaret. He had met her at the beginning of the school year during the staff orientation day and remembered her as a caring, attentive educator. He put the phone on speaker and placed it in the cup holder as it rang. "Hello?" a female voice answered after the third ring. "Ms. Margaret, this is Walter Harmon, the driver for Bus Route 14. "Yes, Mr. Harmon. Is everything all right?" Her voice held a note of surprise at receiving a call from a bus driver. "I'm calling about one of your students, Rory Carson," Walter explained, keeping his voice low, even though there was no way Greg or Rory could hear him from the other car. "Have you noticed anything unusual about her behavior lately?" There was a pause before Ms. Margaret responded, her tone more serious. "Actually, yes. She's very quiet, never approaches any of the other students for friendship, and she's been excusing herself to the restroom multiple times during class." Walter nodded to himself, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Anything else?" "Today she seemed particularly unwell," Ms. Margaret continued. "I suggested she go to the clinic, but apparently she went to the theater room instead and fell asleep. One of the drama teachers found her there later." "Did you report this to Principal Daniels?" Walter asked, carefully maintaining his distance from Greg's car as they turned onto the highway. "Yes, but he dismissed it as typical new student rebellion. Said he'd deal with her tomorrow after his meeting with the school board." Ms. Margaret paused. "Why are you asking about this, Mr. Harmon? Has something happened on your bus?" Walter took a deep breath. "I found something under Rory's seat today." He briefly pulled over to send Ms. Margaret the same photos he'd sent to the principal. "I'm sending you pictures now." He heard the soft ping of a received message, then silence as Ms. Margaret presumably examined the images. "These are birth control pills," she finally said, her voice hushed with concern. "Where exactly did you find these?" "Hidden under the seat where Rory always sits," Walter confirmed. "Based on what I've observed and what you've just told me, I'm very worried about her." "This is serious," Ms. Margaret agreed. "The parents need to know about this immediately." "I've been trying to reach them," Walter explained, describing his earlier visit to their home and his current situation following Greg's car. "I'm considering calling the police, but I'm not sure if that's the right move yet." "Please don't call the police just yet," Ms. Margaret urged. "Principal Daniels would be furious if we involved law enforcement without his approval. We should try to handle this internally first. I'll see if I can find the mother's contact information in our system." Walter noticed that Greg's car was now heading toward the outskirts of town, away from residential areas. "They're driving to the edge of town now," he reported. "I'm going to stay with them and make sure Rory's safe." "Be careful, Walter," Ms. Margaret cautioned. "Keep me updated, and I'll try to reach the mother." After ending the call, Walter focused on maintaining a safe following distance as Greg's sedan continued down the highway. After about 45 minutes of driving, they turned off toward a rural park, a spacious area with walking trails, picnic grounds, and a small lake. It was approaching 4:30 p.m., and while the park wasn't crowded, there were still a few families enjoying the late afternoon sunshine. Greg parked in the lot near the entrance, and Walter found a spot several rows away where he could observe without being obvious. He watched as Greg and Rory got out of the car and walked toward the picnic area. Greg carried a small cooler while Rory trailed behind him, her posture suggesting reluctance. Walter waited until they were settled before cautiously exiting his own vehicle and following on foot, maintaining his distance but keeping them in sight. A sense of dread pooled in Walter's stomach, but he hoped it's just a regular family picnic. But why did the girl look so miserable if this was just an innocent family outing? Walter made his way through the park, staying on the paths and trying to appear like any other visitor enjoying the late afternoon sunshine. He kept Greg and Rory in his peripheral vision, not wanting to draw attention to himself by staring directly at them. The stepfather had set up a picnic blanket on the grass, arranging items from the cooler he'd brought. Walter observed as Greg opened a bottle of beer for himself and handed Rory what appeared to be a soft drink in a can. Relief washed over Walter at the sight. At least Greg wasn't giving alcohol to a minor, as he had feared earlier. From his vantage point on a nearby bench, Walter watched their interaction. What might have looked like a normal family picnic to casual observers struck him as distinctly uncomfortable. Rory sat stiffly at the edge of the blanket, barely touching her drink. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, responding to Greg's occasional comments with minimal movement. At one point, Greg reached over and placed his hands on Rory's shoulders in what appeared to be a joking massage. The girl immediately tensed and shoved his hands away with surprising force. Greg laughed it off, but Walter could see the brief flash of anger in his expression. "Maybe I am overreacting," Walter murmured to himself, doubt creeping in. Perhaps Rory really was just grieving her grandmother's death, as Greg had claimed. Perhaps the birth control pills were related to a relationship with a boy her own age. Troubling for someone so young, but not necessarily sinister. Walter was considering leaving and allowing the principal to handle the situation tomorrow when he noticed 3 men approaching Greg and Rory's picnic spot. They were in their 30s or 40s, casually dressed but with an intensity in their manner that immediately put Walter on alert. Greg stood to greet them, slapping one on the back and laughing as if they were old friends. After a brief conversation that Walter couldn't hear from his position, Greg gestured for Rory to get up. The 5 of them, Greg, Rory, and the 3 men, began walking away from the picnic area toward a plain white building that appeared to be a maintenance shed for the park. Walter's unease returned tenfold as he watched one of the men produce a key and unlock the door. There was no legitimate reason Walter could imagine for 4 grown men to take a teenage girl into a locked shed in a secluded part of the park. His hands shaking slightly, Walter pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher answered promptly. "I need to report a suspicious situation involving a minor," Walter said, keeping his voice low as he moved closer to the shed. "I'm at Lakeside Park near the maintenance buildings on the east side. A teenage girl has been taken into a locked shed by 4 adult men. I believe she may be in danger." "Sir, are you certain the girl is in danger? Do you know her?" "Yes, I'm her school bus driver. I've been concerned about her behavior and discovered she's been hiding birth control pills on my bus. Now her stepfather has brought her to this remote location to meet with these men." Walter's voice grew more urgent. "Please send someone quickly. Something is very wrong here." "We're dispatching officers to your location now," the dispatcher assured him. "They should be there in approximately 10 minutes. Can you safely remain on the line and keep the building in sight without approaching?" "Yes, I can do that," Walter confirmed, finding a position behind a cluster of trees where he could observe the shed without being easily spotted. "Can you describe the individuals involved?" the dispatcher asked. Walter provided descriptions of Greg, Rory, and the 3 men as best he could, including details about their clothing and the vehicles in the parking lot. As he spoke, he crept closer to the shed, his concern for Rory overriding his normal caution. The building had small, dusty windows set high in the walls. Walter approached one of them, wiping away grime with his sleeve to peer inside. The interior was dimly lit, but he could make out the figures of the 4 men gathered around Rory. The girl was backed against a wall, her face streaked with tears. "Do as you're told, Rory," Walter heard Greg say, his voice muffled but audible through the thin walls. "You know what happens if you don't cooperate." "Please don't make me," Rory pleaded, her voice breaking. "I can't do this." "Your mother will hate you for this," Greg hissed, his voice dropping lower. "When she finds out you're pregnant, she's going to have a new baby. She'll forget you even exist." Walter's blood ran cold at the words. He relayed what he was hearing to the 911 dispatcher, his voice tight with anger. "The police are 3 minutes out," the dispatcher informed him. "Please do not attempt to intervene yourself." Walter was about to respond when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He startled, nearly dropping his phone, as he turned to find 2 men in running clothes standing behind him. "What are you doing peering in there, man?" one of them asked, his expression suspicious. Walter hastily explained the situation, keeping his voice low. "There's a girl in there who needs help. I've called the police. They're on their way." The two joggers exchanged glances, then peered through the window themselves. Their expressions hardened as they took in the scene inside. "We can't just wait out here," the taller of the two said, his jaw set with determination. "They could be hurting her right now." "The police said to wait," Walter began, but was cut off by a sudden silence from inside the shed. The men had apparently heard something and gone quiet. Making a split-second decision, the joggers approached the door and pounded on it forcefully. "Hey, open up in there!" one of them shouted. Complete silence fell, stretching for several seconds. Then, faintly, they heard Rory's voice cry out, "Help! Please help me!" As if on cue, police sirens wailed in the distance, rapidly growing louder. 2 patrol cars pulled into the park, lights flashing, and 4 officers quickly approached the scene, drawing their weapons. "Police! Everyone inside, come out with your hands visible," one officer commanded through the door. When no immediate response came, the officers exchanged quick words before one returned to the patrol car and retrieved a heavy tool. With practiced efficiency, they breached the door, the wood splintering around the lock. "Hands up! On your knees now!" the officers shouted as they entered the shed. 3 of the men immediately complied, dropping to their knees with their hands raised. But Greg remained standing near Rory, who was huddled on the floor. "Step away from the girl," an officer ordered, his weapon trained on Greg. Greg's face contorted with defiance. "This is all a misunderstanding," he insisted, not moving from his position over Rory. "Last warning," the officer said firmly. "Step away now, or we will use force." With deliberate slowness, Greg reached for a bottle of alcohol on a nearby shelf. "You don't understand," he began, his hand closing around the neck of the bottle. "Drop it!" several officers shouted in unison. "Drop it now, or we will shoot." For a tense moment, it seemed Greg might try something desperate. Then, with a curse, he let the bottle fall back onto the shelf and raised his hands. "On your knees," the officer directed again. Finally, Greg complied, sinking to his knees. Officers moved in quickly to secure him with handcuffs. As they led the men out one by one, Greg's gaze locked on Walter standing outside. His face twisted with rage, and with a sudden burst of strength, he lunged toward Walter, nearly breaking free from the officer's grip. "You! This is your fault!" he shouted, attempting to headbutt Walter before the officers restrained him fully. Walter stepped back, shock coursing through him at the man's violence. He watched as the officers secured Greg in one of the patrol cars, the man still hurling obscenities through the window. Inside the shed, Rory remained huddled on the floor, her arms wrapped protectively around herself as an officer gently approached her. Within 20 minutes of the arrests, the quiet park had transformed into a flurry of official activity. 2 additional police cars had arrived, along with an ambulance and a vehicle carrying a social worker. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the area around the shed, and officers were taking statements from Walter and the 2 joggers who had helped intervene. The paramedics had guided Rory to sit at the back of the ambulance, where they were checking her vital signs and offering her a blanket, despite the mild evening temperature. A female social worker sat beside her, speaking in gentle tones that Walter couldn't hear from where he stood. Walter watched as the 2 joggers finished giving their statements. They nodded to him as they departed, one giving him a respectful thumbs up. Walter felt profound gratitude for their intervention. Strangers who had chosen to get involved when they could have simply walked away. As the police finished recording his own statement, Walter saw Rory glance in his direction. Her eyes, still red from crying, held a new expression: tentative gratitude. She said something to the social worker, who nodded and motioned for Walter to approach. Walter walked over slowly, not wanting to overwhelm the girl after all she had been through. "Thank you," Rory said quietly as he reached the ambulance, her voice hoarse from crying. Walter nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm just glad you're safe now." He crouched down to be at her eye level, then reached into his waist bag and carefully withdrew the pills he had found earlier. He showed them to Rory and the officials present. "Rory," he said gently, "I found these under your seat on the bus. I think you need to explain to these people about these pills if you were taking them because of what your stepfather was doing to you." Rory's face crumpled at the sight of the pills, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She looked between Walter, the social worker, and the female police officer who had joined them. "It's okay, Rory," the social worker assured her. "You're not in trouble. We just need to understand what's been happening so we can help you." Rory took a shuddering breath and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mom divorced my real dad last year," she began. "He got in trouble with the police for fraud or something. Then Mom met Greg, and she got pregnant pretty quickly." Rory paused, rubbing her arms as if cold despite the blanket. "Mom's been gone for 2 weeks now. She's staying at my grandmother's house because it's our family tradition. She wanted to give birth there and stay for a month to take care of the baby." The social worker made notes as Rory spoke, occasionally nodding encouragingly. "When did Greg start hurting you?" the police officer asked gently. Rory's gaze dropped to her hands. "A month ago," she whispered. "He started coming into my room at night when I was sleeping. I was so scared, but he told me if I told anyone, especially my mom, he would kill us, and the baby too." Her voice broke. "So I just kept quiet all the time." "And the pills?" Walter prompted softly, gesturing to the birth control package. "I started feeling sick in the mornings," Rory continued. "One of the girls at school noticed and told me I should get pregnancy prevention pills. I didn't really understand, but she said they would help me not get pregnant, so I bought them with money I had saved." The paramedic exchanged glances with the social worker, both looking concerned. "Rory," the paramedic said carefully, "if you were already feeling sick, like morning sickness, then prevention pills wouldn't help. They're meant to prevent pregnancy before it happens, not end one that's already begun." Rory looked up, confusion and fear in her eyes. "I didn't know that. I thought they would stop the sickness." "Someone found them in my backpack at school," she continued, "so I started hiding them under the seat on the bus where I always sit." The police officer placed a gentle hand on Rory's shoulder. "Rory, we're going to need to contact your mother and your school, and we'll need to have a doctor examine you to determine if you're pregnant." "No, please," Rory begged, fresh panic in her voice. "I don't want this. I can't be pregnant. My mom will hate me." "Your mother won't hate you," the social worker assured her. "None of this is your fault, Rory. Your stepfather is the one who did something terrible, not you." "We need to talk to your mother," the officer said firmly but kindly. "This isn't something we can keep from her." Rory's shoulders slumped in defeat as she nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. Walter watched the interaction with a heavy heart. He had seen troubled kids before in his years as a bus driver, but nothing like this. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the officials. "If it's all right," he said, "I'd like to accompany Rory to the hospital. I want to make sure she's not alone while waiting for her mother." The social worker considered this for a moment, then nodded. "That would be fine, Mr. Harmon. We'll need to take your statement at the hospital as well." One of the police officers approached their group. "The principal has been contacted," he informed them. "He says he'll meet us at the hospital." Walter nodded, remembering the message he had sent earlier that had gone unanswered. Her homeroom teacher, Ms. Margaret, also knows about the situation. I called her earlier when I became concerned. "We'll contact her as well," the officer confirmed. "Now, let's get Rory to the hospital for proper care." The emergency room of Willow Glen Memorial Hospital buzzed with its usual controlled chaos as Walter sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair waiting for news. After their arrival, Rory had been whisked away for examination, leaving Walter to give his statement to the police in a small conference room down the hall. He checked his watch. Nearly 2 hours had passed since they'd arrived at the hospital. The social worker, a compassionate woman named Ms. Rivera, occasionally updated him on what was happening, but the details were necessarily limited due to privacy concerns. As Walter sipped a cup of mediocre coffee from the vending machine, Ms. Rivera approached him again. "Mr. Harmon," she said, taking a seat beside him, "Rory is asking for you. They've finished the initial examination, and she's been moved to a private room. If you'd like to see her, I can take you there now." Walter stood immediately. "Yes, please." Ms. Rivera led him through a maze of corridors to a small room where Rory sat on the edge of a hospital bed. She looked impossibly small in the oversized hospital gown, her eyes red-rimmed but dry for the moment. A female doctor was making notes on a tablet near the window. "Walter," Rory said, a hint of relief in her voice. "How are you doing, kiddo?" he asked gently, taking a seat in the chair beside her bed. Before she could answer, the doctor spoke up. "Mr. Harmon, I'm Dr. Chen. I understand you're the one who initially noticed something was wrong." Walter nodded. "I'm Rory's bus driver. I noticed her crying on the bus every day, and then found those pills." Dr. Chen's expression was grave. "I've completed my examination of Rory, and I've confirmed that she is indeed pregnant, currently in the first week of pregnancy." Walter closed his eyes briefly, the confirmation of his worst fears hitting him like a physical blow. When he opened them again, he saw tears silently streaming down Rory's face. A commotion in the hallway interrupted the moment. A woman's voice, high with panic, could be heard demanding information from the hospital staff. Seconds later, the door burst open, and two women rushed in, one in her late 30s and another perhaps 20 years older. "Rory!" the younger woman cried, rushing to the bed and gathering the girl in her arms. "Oh my God, baby, what happened?" The police called and said. She broke off, unable to finish the sentence as she held her daughter tightly. "Mom!" Rory sobbed, clinging to her mother. The older woman, presumably Rory's grandmother, stood at the foot of the bed, her face a mask of shock and fury. "Where is he?" she demanded, of no one in particular. "Where is that monster? I'll kill him myself." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Mrs. Carson, Mrs. Carson's mother, I'm Dr. Chen. I've been caring for Rory since she arrived. Perhaps we could speak privately about her condition?" Rory's mother pulled back slightly, her face pale. "Condition? What's wrong with my daughter?" Dr. Chen glanced at Rory, then back to her mother. "Mrs. Carson, I'm afraid Rory is pregnant?" The words landed like a bomb in the small room. Rory's mother swayed on her feet, her face draining of what little color remained. The grandmother rushed forward to support her, helping her into a chair where she sat heavily, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be. She's just a child." "I'm so sorry, Mom," Rory said, her voice breaking. "I tried to stop him, but—" "This is not your fault," her mother interrupted fiercely, reaching for her hand. "None of this is your fault. Do you understand me? It's Greg. That... Words failed her as she dissolved into tears, her body shaking with sobs. The grandmother turned to Dr. Chen, her expression hard. "What are the options here? She's 14 years old. She cannot have a baby." Dr. Chen nodded solemnly. "I was about to discuss this with you. There are health risks associated with pregnancy at Rory's age. Additionally, given the circumstances, there are options available for termination if that's what Rory and you decide is best." "Illinois has some of the most progressive abortion laws in the country," Ms. Rivera added gently. "If that's the path you choose, there would be no legal barriers." Walter, feeling like an intruder on this deeply personal family moment, stood quietly. "I should give you all some privacy," he said, moving toward the door. "Wait," Rory called out. "Please don't go yet." Her mother turned, seeming to notice Walter for the first time. "Who are you?" "This is Walter Harmon, Mrs. Carson," Ms. Rivera explained. "He's Rory's school bus driver. He's the one who noticed something was wrong and ultimately alerted the authorities." The grandmother approached Walter, tears in her eyes. "You saved our girl," she said, gripping his hand fiercely. "Thank you, thank you." Walter nodded, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone should do." Rory's mother struggled to her feet and embraced Walter unexpectedly. "Thank you," she whispered, before pulling away, wiping her tears. A knock at the door preceded the entrance of a police officer. "Mr. Harmon, could I speak with you for a moment?" Walter nodded and followed the officer into the hallway, leaving the family to their private discussion with the doctor and social worker. "I wanted to update you on the situation," the officer said, once they were alone in a quiet corner. "Greg Whitmore is in custody and has been charged with multiple serious offenses. He's not talking, but the 3 men we arrested with him are cooperating in exchange for reduced charges." "What have they told you?" Walter asked. "According to their statements, Whitmore has a history of predatory behavior. He specifically targeted single mothers with daughters." The officer's expression hardened. "He was jealous of Rory because she was from the first marriage. He took advantage of her and wanted to break her spirit so that her mother would reject her and focus solely on him and his upcoming child." Walter felt sick at the calculated cruelty. Will he be able to get out on bail? The officer shook his head. "Not likely. With the evidence we have and the testimony of the other men, he's facing serious jail time, and we're investigating whether he has a pattern of this behavior with other victims." Walter nodded, relieved that the man would face justice. "What about the principal and Ms. Margaret? I contacted both of them earlier today." "They're both at the police station giving statements," the officer confirmed. "We're trying to determine if there was any negligence on the part of the school in not noticing or addressing signs of abuse." Walter let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Good. That's good." "We'll need you to testify if this goes to trial," the officer added. "But that's down the road. For now, you should go home and rest. You've done more than enough today." Walter nodded, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion that had settled over him. "I will," he promised. Walter exited the room where he had given his statement to the police, the exhaustion of the day finally settling into his bones. As he walked down the corridor, he noticed a woman sitting alone in the waiting area, her eyes red from crying, one hand resting protectively on her heavily pregnant belly. She looked up as Walter approached, and recognition flashed across her face. She stood with some effort, extending her hand. "Mr. Harmon, I'm Laura Carson, Rory's mother." Her voice was soft but steady. "I didn't get to properly thank you earlier for what you did for my daughter." Walter shook her hand gently. "Please, call me Walter, and there's no need for thanks. How is Rory doing?" Laura gestured to the empty seat beside her, and Walter sat down. She sank back into her chair with a tired sigh. "The doctor confirmed that she is indeed pregnant, now in the first week." Laura's voice caught slightly. "They've explained the options to us." She twisted her hands in her lap. "It's such an impossible situation. My daughter carrying my husband's child, while I'm 8 months pregnant with his child as well?" Walter remained silent, understanding there was nothing he could say to ease such an unimaginable burden. "I never suspected," Laura continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought leaving her with Greg while I stayed at my mother's house to prepare for the baby was the right thing to do. Our family has this tradition." She trailed off, shaking her head. "How could I have been so blind?" "You couldn't have known," Walter said gently. "Men like Greg are expert manipulators. They hide their true nature." Laura nodded, though she didn't seem convinced. She started to stand, one hand bracing against the arm of the chair. "I should get back to Rory. We still have so much to discuss about what happens next." As she rose to her feet, Eleanor, Rory's grandmother, approached from the hallway. Her face was drawn, her eyes red from crying, but she carried herself with rigid dignity. "Laura, Rory is asking for you," she said, then turned to Walter. "Mr. Harmon, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Eleanor Parker, Rory's grandmother." Walter stood and shook her hand. "It's good to meet you, Mrs. Parker, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Suddenly, Laura gasped sharply, doubling over, her face contorted in pain as she clutched her abdomen. "Laura?" Eleanor rushed to her daughter's side. "What's wrong?" "I think," Laura managed between gritted teeth, "the baby's coming." Walter immediately called for help, and within moments, medical staff converged on them. Laura's water had broken and contractions were coming rapidly. "She's only 38 weeks, Eleanor told the doctor, her voice trembling. "The baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks." "The stress likely triggered early labor," the doctor explained as they helped Laura onto a wheelchair. "We need to get her to the maternity ward immediately." As they began to wheel her away, Laura reached out and grasped Walter's wrist. "Please," she gasped through another contraction. "Stay with Rory. Don't leave her alone." Walter nodded. "I promise." Eleanor looked torn, glancing between her daughter being wheeled away and the direction of Rory's room. "Rory shouldn't be alone right now, but Laura needs me too." "Go with your daughter," Walter assured her. "I'll stay with Rory until you can return." Eleanor hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Thank you. I'll come back as soon as I can." As Eleanor hurried after the medical team transporting her daughter, Walter cautiously entered Rory's room. The girl sat on the edge of her bed, her face a mask of fear and confusion. "Is my mom going to be okay?" she asked as soon as she saw Walter. "Your mom is strong," Walter reassured her, taking a seat in the chair beside her bed. "The doctors are taking good care of her." Rory nodded, though she didn't look convinced. "She got so upset when we were talking about what to do." Her hand unconsciously went to her stomach. "Grandma was saying I should keep it, that we could say it was someone else's, a boy from school or something." Walter kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he was troubled by the suggestion. "What did your mom say?" "She got really angry, said she wouldn't let me sacrifice my life or carry that reminder forever." Rory's voice dropped to a whisper. They sat in silence for a moment before Rory spoke again, her voice so quiet Walter had to lean forward to hear her. "I heard my grandma talking to a nurse. She said the new baby will come soon, and my mom wouldn't have more time for her, and will love me less, that the nurse should just... You know?" Walter turned back to Rory, choosing his words carefully. "Rory, I want to tell you something important," he said. "I have 5 children of my own. Each one is different. Each one is special in their own way. And not once, not for a single moment, did loving one of them mean I had less love for the others?" Rory looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Love doesn't work that way," Walter continued. "It's not like a pie where each person gets a smaller slice when someone new comes along. It's more like..." He searched for the right metaphor. "Like a candle lighting another candle. The first flame doesn't get smaller. Instead, there's just more light." "You really believe that?" Rory asked, her voice small. "I know it," Walter affirmed. "Your mother loves you, Rory. A new baby won't change that. And whatever decision you make about your own situation, that won't change her love for you either." Rory was quiet for a long time, considering his words. Finally, she looked up at him with the ghost of a smile. "Thank you for finding those pills, Walter. And for following us today. I was so scared." "I couldn't just look away when I knew something was wrong," Walter said simply. "That's not who I am." As they sat together waiting for news of Laura and the baby, Walter reflected on the events that had brought him here. A simple observation, a moment of concern, a decision to act rather than ignore. Small choices that had changed the course of a young girl's life. He didn't know what decisions Rory and her family would ultimately make, or how the healing process would unfold in the days and weeks to come. But he knew that by choosing to pay attention, by refusing to look away from a child in distress, he had made a difference. And in the end, perhaps that was all any of us could hope to do, to notice when someone needs help and to find the courage to act. After the bus driver Walter made the shocking discovery under Rory's seat and exposed the abuse she had lived with under her stepfather's care, he hoped the girl could heal from the horrors she had endured at such a young age. But soon Walter discovered that Rory's journey to getting her normal teenage life back was far from over, and the nightmare had only just begun. Before we dive into part 2 of this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Walter Harmon adjusted the side mirror of his yellow school bus as he navigated the quiet morning streets of Willow Glen. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the pavement, its weak light doing little to dispel the morning chill. 5 months had passed since that day, the day that had changed so many lives, including his own. He glanced down at his clipboard, checking the name of the next passenger, Rory Carson. Walter pulled the bus to a gentle stop outside a modest 2-story house with a well-maintained garden. Unlike the blue-sided house where he'd once dropped Rory off, this one was in a different neighborhood, further from school, but still within his pickup range. After the incident with Greg, Rory had moved in with her mother Laura and grandmother Eleanor. The family had settled in Eleanor's house after Laura gave birth there, following what Walter understood was a family tradition. Walter honked the horn once, a gentle alert of his arrival. He waited patiently, his eyes fixed on the front door. After a few moments, it swung open, and Rory stepped out. She looked different from 5 months ago. Her face had filled out a bit, and she no longer had that perpetual hunted look in her eyes. But there was still a reserve about her, a quietness that seemed out of place in a 14-year-old. Eleanor, Rory's grandmother, followed her onto the porch. The older woman fussed around Rory, straightening her uniform and fastening her belt properly. Even from the bus, Walter could hear Eleanor's crisp, admonishing tone. "You didn't finish your breakfast again today," she complained, her expression clearly displeased. "I spent all that time preparing it for you." She straightened Rory's collar with nimble fingers. "You'd better finish your lunch, young lady. You're still too thin." Rory nodded silently, her eyes downcast. A moment later, Laura appeared in the doorway, cradling a baby in her arms. The infant, Greg's biological child, was bundled in a pale blue blanket. "It's okay, Mother," Laura said to Eleanor, her voice gentle but firm. "Take it easy. Rory can eat as much as she needs." Eleanor pursed her lips. "People nowadays are too soft with children. Back in the days, you'd get a slap for not finishing your plate," she muttered, but stepped back from Rory nonetheless. Laura leaned forward and kissed Rory's cheek. "Have a good day, sweetheart," she said warmly. "I love you." "Love you too, Mom," Rory replied softly. Rory waved goodbye to her mother and grandmother as she walked toward the bus. Laura and Eleanor waved to Walter as well before retreating into the house. Walter noticed how Laura's eyes lingered on her daughter, filled with a mixture of love and concern. As Rory climbed the steps onto the bus, Walter greeted her with a gentle smile. "Good morning, Rory." "Morning, Mr. Harmon," she replied in her quiet voice, managing a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Rory made her way down the aisle to her usual seat, the same one she'd always chosen, directly above the air vent. Walter found it interesting that despite everything that had happened, she still gravitated to that spot. Perhaps it was simply the comfort of routine. Walter closed the door and pulled away from the curb, merging back onto the road. In his rearview mirror, he could see Rory sitting quietly, her gaze fixed on the window. Unlike the other children who chatted animatedly around her, she kept to herself, a small island of solitude in the noisy sea of adolescence. As he navigated the familiar streets toward Willow Glen Intermediate School, Walter became aware of whispers and stifled laughter. Glancing in his mirror again, he noticed several students looking in Rory's direction, their heads bent together conspiratorially. One boy mimicked wiping tears from his face, causing his friend to snicker. Walter frowned. He knew that despite the school's strict anti-bullying policy, Rory's situation had made her a target. The details of what had happened 5 months ago had leaked out, as secrets inevitably did in small communities like Willow Glen. The mysterious nature of her absence, followed by her equally mysterious return, had fueled endless speculation among the student body. "Keep it down back there," Walter called, his voice firm but not unkind, "and make sure those seatbelts are fastened properly." The whispering subsided temporarily, though Walter knew it wouldn't last. As he drove, his thoughts turned to everything that had transpired since that fateful day. The first few months after the incident had been consumed by police work, gathering statements, collecting evidence, pressing charges against Greg and the other men involved. Walter had given his testimony multiple times, recounting how he'd found the birth control pills and followed his instinct that something was wrong. Greg's lawyer had filed for a psychiatric evaluation, delaying the trial. The last Walter had heard, they were trying to arrange a plea deal with reduced sentences, using Greg's supposed mental health conditions as their defense. But as far as Walter knew, the plea deal had been denied, and Greg and his accomplices were still facing harsh sentences. Walter hadn't kept up with the case lately. His own health had begun to deteriorate, an early onset of lung cancer that had shifted his focus to his own mortality rather than the fate of Greg Whitmore. Besides, he'd been confident that there was no way those men would escape justice, not with 2 eyewitnesses to what had happened that day at the park maintenance shed. From conversations with Laura, Walter knew that Rory had been seeing a child therapist to process the emotional trauma inflicted by her stepfather. The girl had made progress, but healing was a slow process. At a red light, Walter glanced back at Rory again. She was studiously ignoring the other children, but her posture was tense. As he watched, a crumpled paper ball sailed through the air and landed on her seat. Suppressed laughter rippled through the bus. "That's enough," Walter said sharply. "The next person who throws anything will be walking to school. Understood?" Everyone buckle up and face forward. The bus fell silent. Walter caught Rory's eye in the mirror and gave her a small nod, which she returned almost imperceptibly. When they finally arrived at school, Rory darted off the bus before any of the other children, eager to escape the confined space. Walter remained in his seat, checking off student names on his paper list. When he looked up, he spotted Rory walking toward the school entrance. A tall boy stepped into her path, blocking her way. Walter's eyes narrowed slightly as he observed the interaction. The boy looked like a senior, tall with a confident posture, clean haircut, and a sharp uniform. After a moment, Walter recognized him. Nathan Wells. He had been on Walter's bus route last year, now a final-year student, usually quiet but always polite. Rory's posture was tense as Nathan leaned slightly toward her, hands tucked in his pockets. She pulled back a little as he said something, but Nathan moved closer again, speaking low and smiling faintly, too charming, too deliberate for Walter's liking. Rory said nothing in response, but her hands fidgeted nervously with the hem of her sweater. Walter stood up, feeling a familiar sense of unease. Something about the boy's body language triggered an old instinct in him, the same instinct that had led him to follow Greg's car 5 months ago. He stepped down from the bus, excusing himself from the students still lining up to have their names checked, and crossed the lot toward Rory. "Everything all right here?" Walter asked, his tone casual, but his eyes watchful. Nathan straightened up, that practiced smile still in place. "Good morning, Mr. Harmon." "Is Nathan troubling you, Rory?" Walter asked directly. Rory shook her head quickly. "No, it's fine." "I just wanted to talk to her for a minute," Nathan explained, his voice smooth and respectful. Walter nodded slowly. "Okay, but please, no touching. School rules." Nathan gave both Rory and Walter a reassuring smile. "Of course, sir." He turned back to Rory. "You'd better get to class. The bell's about to ring." Rory glanced at Walter, and to his surprise, her expression held a hint of annoyance. "I don't need your protection, Mr. Harmon," she said quietly. "I can stand up for myself." Before Walter could respond, Rory had turned and was walking quickly toward the school entrance as the first bell rang. Nathan followed behind her, maintaining a respectful distance. Walter watched them until they disappeared inside the building. He returned to the bus, completed his paperwork, and signed the necessary forms. But the encounter with Nathan and Rory's unexpected response bothered him. He wasn't sure whether to feel pleased that Rory was finally making connections with peers or concerned about the nature of Nathan's interest in her. After everything she'd been through, the last thing Rory needed was another predatory male in her life. But perhaps he was being overprotective. Perhaps Nathan's interest was genuine and respectful. Walter hoped so for Rory's sake. But the nagging feeling of unease persisted as he finished his morning route. With a few hours to kill before the afternoon pickup, Walter sat in the school staff lounge, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. His mind kept circling back to Greg Whitmore. It had been months since he'd checked on the case, assuming that justice would take its course. But what if it hadn't? The uncertainty gnawed at him until he couldn't ignore it anymore. Setting his coffee aside, Walter made his way to the school library. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Patel, smiled warmly as he approached her desk. "Good morning, Walter. What brings you to my domain today?" "I was hoping I could use one of the computers," Walter explained. "Need to look something up." Mrs. Patel's eyes twinkled. "For you, I can do better than those ancient public terminals. Come on back to the staff room. You can use my desktop. Much faster." Walter followed her into the small room behind the circulation desk, grateful for her kindness. He settled into the chair she offered, and as she left to help a student, he typed "Greg Whitmore" into the search bar. The results loaded quickly, and Walter's blood ran cold. The headline of the top article read, "Local Man Released on Probation After Mental Health Plea." It was dated 3 weeks ago. Walter clicked on the article, scanning it with growing dismay. According to the report, Greg and 2 of his accomplices had been released on probation with GPS monitoring after their plea deals were finally granted. The judge had accepted the defense's portrayal of Greg as a troubled man with unresolved trauma. And since this was technically his first offense, he had been given a second chance. "How did I not know about this?" Walter muttered, scrolling through the article for more details. The men were required to wear ankle monitors at all times and observe strict curfews. They were prohibited from contacting Rory or Laura directly or indirectly and were required to stay at least 500 feet away from their residence, workplace, and school. Walter pulled out his phone and dialed Laura's number. After 3 rings, she answered. "Walter, is everything okay? Is Rory all right?" Her voice was immediately concerned. "Rory's fine," Walter assured her quickly. "But I just found something troubling. Did you know that Greg was released on probation 3 weeks ago?" The silence on the other end of the line told him everything. "What?" Laura finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, that's not possible. We would have been notified." "The article says he was released with GPS monitoring after his plea deal was accepted. Mental health conditions, first offense, the usual excuses." "I never received any notification," Laura said, her voice shaking slightly. "Are you certain?" "I'm looking at the news article right now," Walter confirmed. "It says the judge granted the plea 3 weeks ago." Laura was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was more controlled, but Walter could hear the undercurrent of fear. "Even with monitoring, we need to be careful. There's always a chance he might try something." "I'll keep an eye on Rory during school hours," Walter promised, "and I'll report anything suspicious immediately." After ending the call, Walter continued his research, looking for any additional information on Greg's release conditions. He found nothing more specific than what the first article had provided. With a heavy sigh, Walter closed the browser and returned to the main library to thank Mrs. Patel. As he stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, he checked his watch. 11 a.m., still hours before the end of the school day, but recess time for many students. To his surprise, Walter spotted Rory slipping out of a side door of the school building. She glanced around furtively before hurrying across the quad toward the fence line. A moment later, Nathan appeared from the same door, following her. Walter's instincts kicked into high gear. He quickened his pace, following at a distance. When he rounded the corner, he saw Rory and Nathan standing close together near a gap in the fence that separated the school grounds from a wooded area beyond. "Rory!" Walter called, approaching them with determined strides. Both teenagers jumped, turning toward him with startled expressions. "What do you think you're doing?" Walter demanded, his voice firm. "You can't just leave school grounds during hours." Rory's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "We were just talking." "You can talk inside the school," Walter countered. He turned to Nathan. "You should know better. You're a senior, for goodness sake." Nathan had the decency to look ashamed. "Sorry, Mr. Harmon, we weren't going to go far." "That's not the point," Walter said. "Rory, please return to the building immediately." With a frustrated glare at Walter, Rory stalked back toward the school. Nathan made to follow her, but Walter placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not so fast," he said quietly. "What's your interest in Rory?" Nathan shrugged off Walter's hand and glanced around at the street. "No offense, sir, but that's between her and me." Walter watched as the boy jogged to catch up with Rory, occasionally glancing around the corners as if he was looking for something or someone. The two slipped back into the school building, leaving Walter alone with his growing unease. During his lunch break, Walter sought out Ms. Margaret, Rory's homeroom teacher, in the staff canteen. The young woman was sitting alone, grading papers while she ate her salad. "Mind if I join you?" Walter asked. Ms. Margaret looked up with a smile. "Not at all, Walter. Please, sit." As he settled into the chair across from her, Walter explained what he had witnessed earlier. "I'm concerned about Rory," he concluded. "This boy Nathan seems to be showing a lot of interest in her, and after what happened with her stepfather." Ms. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your concern, especially given what Rory's been through. But this is actually the first I've heard of her making any connection with a peer. She's been so isolated since returning to school." "That doesn't mean we should let her leave school grounds during hours," Walter pointed out. "Of course not," Ms. Margaret agreed. "I'll speak to her about that, but perhaps if you see them together after school, you could give them some space. This might be Rory's first step toward becoming more confident and open to socializing again." Walter considered her words. Perhaps he was being overprotective and overthinking. After all, teenage romance was a normal part of growing up, something Rory deserved to experience in a healthy way. As he made his way back to his bus to prepare for the afternoon route, Walter spotted a familiar figure hovering near the vehicle. Nathan stood by the bus, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly waiting for someone. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" Walter asked, approaching the boy. Nathan started, not having noticed Walter's approach. "Oh, Mr. Harmon, I was looking for you, actually." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Nathan nodded, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "I wanted to ask for your help. I'd like to surprise Rory." He held up the envelope. "I wrote her a letter, and I was hoping you'd let me place it on her usual seat for her to find after school." Despite his misgivings, Walter found himself chuckling at the boy's earnestness. Miss Margaret's words echoed in his mind. Perhaps this was exactly what Rory needed. "All right," he said, unlocking the bus door. "You can put it on her seat." Nathan's face lit up with a genuine smile. "Thank you, sir." He bounded up the steps and carefully placed the envelope on the seat where Rory always sat. As he passed Walter on his way out, he added hastily, "Please don't read it." Walter held up his hands. "I have no business reading your private messages. I respect your privacy." "Thanks again," Nathan said. "I should get back to class before the bell rings." Walter watched him jog back toward the school building, feeling a mixture of concern and hope. Young love was such a tender, vulnerable thing, especially for someone like Rory, who had experienced the darkest side of human relationships. "Let's hope this is the good kind," Walter murmured to himself as he prepared for the afternoon route. The final bell rang at 3:15 p.m., and within minutes the school grounds were flooded with students eager to begin their weekend. Walter stood by the open door of his bus, clipboard in hand, checking off names as students boarded. Rory was the last of her class to arrive. As she stepped onto the bus, Walter noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the slight slump of her shoulders. Despite the therapy and the support of her mother, recovery was clearly an ongoing process for her. "Good afternoon, Rory," Walter greeted her. "Afternoon," she replied softly, making her way down the aisle to her usual seat. Walter watched as she noticed the envelope. For a brief moment, confusion crossed her face, followed by curiosity. She picked it up and slid it into her backpack just as a group of girls passed by, giggling and pointing. "Look, the freak got a love letter," one of them stage whispered. "Who'd write to her?" another replied with a snicker. "That's enough," Walter called firmly. "Everyone find your seats and buckle up." As the bus filled with chatter and laughter, Walter started the engine and pulled away from the curb. In his rearview mirror, he could see Rory discreetly opening the envelope, shielding its contents from her neighbors. As she read, a rare smile spread across her face, transforming her features and reminding Walter of the innocent young girl she should have been allowed to remain. The bus had been on the road for about 10 minutes when Rory approached the front, clutching the straps of her backpack tightly. "Mr. Harmon?" she asked hesitantly. "Can you let me off when we reach Maple Street? It's before my stop." Walter frowned slightly. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Rory. I'd need permission from your mother. Why do you want to get off there?" Rory hesitated, not meeting his eyes. "Just need to make a stop before going home." Walter suspected the request had something to do with the letter from Nathan, but he couldn't simply deviate from his route without proper authorization. "I'm sorry, but I'll have to take you to your regular stop. Maybe you can ask your mom about it when you get home." Rory's face fell, but she nodded in understanding and returned to her seat. As Walter navigated the suburban streets, dropping off students one by one, he noticed a dark sedan driving erratically on the opposite side of the road. The car swerved dangerously close to the bus, forcing Walter to veer slightly to avoid a collision. Walter honked his horn sharply, heart pounding as the car sped away. "Reckless idiot," he muttered, checking to make sure all his passengers were safe and secure. Eventually, the bus approached Rory's stop. Laura stood at the edge of the driveway, waiting for her daughter. As Rory stepped off the bus, Laura embraced her warmly. "Grandma took the baby to the doctor," Walter heard Laura tell Rory, "so we can have some quality time together, just us." Laura looked up at Walter and smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Walter. We appreciate all you do." Walter nodded, watching as mother and daughter walked arm in arm toward the house. There was something healing in their closeness, a bond that had perhaps been strengthened by the trauma they had endured together. As Walter pulled away from the curb and headed back toward the bus depot, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Despite everything that had happened, Rory had a loving mother and a safe home. Perhaps that would be enough to help her heal. After returning the bus and clocking out for the day, Walter got into his personal car, a well-worn Buick that had seen better days. He was eager to get home, make a simple dinner, and perhaps watch a baseball game on TV. As he drove past Eleanor's house, Walter noticed the driveway was empty. No sign of Laura's car. He assumed they might be out enjoying a mother and daughter day. But just a few blocks later, something unexpected caught his attention. Two familiar figures walking side by side. It wasn't Laura and Rory. It was Rory and Nathan. They weren't touching, but they were clearly deep in conversation. Walter instinctively eased off the gas, a quiet unease creeping in, despite Ms. Margaret's reminder to give them space. After a moment's hesitation, Walter pulled over and called Laura. "Hello?" she answered on the second ring. "Laura, it's Walter. I just saw Rory walking with a boy from school. Nathan, did you know about this?" "Yes," Laura replied, her voice relaxed. "Nathan came by about 20 minutes after Rory got home. He asked permission to take her for a walk to the neighborhood garden. I thought it might be good for her to start opening up to friendship." "I see," Walter said, watching as the pair turned onto the path leading to Willow Glen Community Garden, a peaceful public space with winding paths, flower beds, and benches tucked among the trees. It was enclosed by a decorative iron fence with several gates around its perimeter. "I wanted to give her a little freedom," Laura continued, though Walter could hear the anxiety in her voice. "But I'm nervous too. This is the first time she's shown interest in spending time with anyone from school." Walter debated internally. His first instinct was to leave Rory be, to give her the space to develop normal relationships. But then he remembered how Nathan had asked her to leave school grounds during class hours, a red flag that continued to nag at him. "Why would he suggest something like that when they barely know each other?" Walter murmured, more to himself than to Laura. "What was that?" Laura asked. "Nothing," Walter replied quickly. "Listen, I'm nearby. If it's all right with you, I'll keep an eye on them from a distance, just to be safe." Relief was evident in Laura's voice. "Would you? That would be wonderful, Walter. Thank you." After ending the call, Walter parked his car where he could observe the main entrance to the garden. From his vantage point, he could see Rory and Nathan walking along one of the paths, stopping occasionally to examine a particularly beautiful flower or interesting plant. "You're being paranoid, old man," Walter muttered to himself, guilt prickling at the edges of his thoughts. It felt uncomfortably close to stalking a teenage girl, a realization that reminded him of his younger days, when he'd taken the same cautious approach with his own daughter whenever someone asked her out. All that vigilance had paid off, he told himself. She was now married, building a happy life with a family of her own. Now, after everything that had happened 5 months ago, those instincts were reignited, and the idea of simply driving away and leaving Rory vulnerable was something he just couldn't do. So he remained in his car, watching the garden entrance and wondering how long he should wait before accepting that his concerns were unfounded. 20 minutes passed, and Walter was seriously considering leaving or at least moving to a nearby cafe where he could rest his aching back while still keeping an eye on the garden. Just as he was about to start his car, a dark sedan sped past, taking a sharp turn around the garden's perimeter. With a jolt, Walter recognized it as the same car that had swerved dangerously close to his bus earlier. Alarm bells rang in his mind as he remembered that there was another entrance to the garden on the far side where the car had just disappeared. Following his instincts, Walter quickly rummaged through his glove compartment, finding an old mechanic's hat and a pair of sunglasses, remnants from his days fixing engines before he became a bus driver. He put them on, hoping they would provide at least some disguise as he investigated. Walter exited his car and walked briskly toward the garden, maintaining what he hoped was an inconspicuous pace. As he approached the secondary entrance, he caught sight of a bald man stepping out of the sedan. The man's back was to him, preventing Walter from seeing his face clearly, but there was something disturbingly familiar about his stocky build and the set of his shoulders. Keeping his distance, Walter positioned himself behind a large oak tree where he could observe without being seen. The bald man approached another car that had just pulled up, leaned into the window briefly, then made a quick hand gesture. In response, 2 more men emerged from the first sedan. Walter's heart nearly stopped as he recognized one of them, Greg Whitmore. Despite the weight loss and the pallor that spoke of illness, there was no mistaking Rory's former stepfather. He was attempting to suppress a cough, swallowing repeatedly and clearing his throat. Walter could see the bulge of an ankle monitor beneath Greg's jeans, a small consolation that did little to ease Walter's growing panic. The second car's door opened, and Walter stared in disbelief as Eleanor, Rory's grandmother, stepped out. Her expression was grim, her movements precise and deliberate, as she walked around to the back seat and opened the door. Greg approached the car and reached inside, emerging with a small bundle, Laura's baby. He held the infant with surprising gentleness, a stark contrast to the cruelty Walter knew him capable of. "Remember our agreement," Eleanor was saying, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet garden. "Keep your end of the bargain and don't be reckless this time. Soon enough, you can be reunited with your son permanently." Greg adjusted the baby in his arms, his face softening as he looked down at the infant. "And you remember yours," he replied, his voice rougher than Walter remembered. "From where I'm standing, there's no way you could convince Laura to forgive me. I want that portion of inheritance you promised. Otherwise—" He made a slicing motion across his throat with his free hand. Walter felt bile rise in his throat. This couldn't be happening. Eleanor, the stern but seemingly protective grandmother, was conspiring with the very man who had abused her granddaughter? Was she involved in what happened 5 months ago, too? "There's no need for violence," Eleanor replied coldly. "We have a common goal, getting rid of that stinky teenage girl. A grieving woman's heart can be as soft as clay, and you just need to be at the right place at the right time, saying the right things." She reached into her purse and withdrew what looked like a check. "But most of all, I want you to make her happy. Whatever it takes, just make her happy and be a happy family, even if I have to pay you." Walter felt a tickle in his throat, the precursor to one of his coughing fits. He swallowed hard, fighting to control it. This revelation was staggering. Eleanor wasn't just strict, she was actively plotting against her own granddaughter. But why? What could possibly drive a grandmother to such betrayal? Greg cradled the baby, a smile playing on his lips. "Don't worry about a thing. Once I get this ankle bracelet off, I'll be out of here, beyond the reach of the police. My men are ready. We'll take the girl and ship her far away." He nodded toward the garden paths. "And the boy's ready too. He's with her." Walter's blood ran cold. Nathan was involved in this? Had his interest in Rory been part of a twisted plot all along? "I see a possible loose end here," Eleanor said coolly. "Deal with him." "We will," came the reply. Eleanor took the baby back, carefully securing him in the car seat. "I need to go. Laura's calling to check on us. Make sure you succeed this time. There won't be a next time if you fail again." As Eleanor drove away, Greg turned to his companions. Walter recognized them now. They were the same men who had been with Greg in the maintenance shed 5 months ago. One of them handed Greg what appeared to be a cutting tool, presumably to remove the ankle monitor. Walter couldn't hold back his cough any longer. A racking spasm shook his body, and he ducked behind the tree, trying to muffle the sound with his handkerchief. When he peered around the trunk again, Greg and his men were looking in his direction, suspicion clear on their faces. Not waiting to see if they had recognized him, Walter hurried back to his car, coughing violently all the way. He fumbled with his keys, finally starting the engine and pulling away from the curb with a screech of tires. He had to find Rory immediately. As he drove around the perimeter of the garden toward the main entrance, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher answered promptly. "I need to report a potential kidnapping in progress," Walter said urgently, his voice hoarse from coughing. "Willow Glen Community Garden. The perpetrators are Greg Whitmore and 2 men, currently in violation of a restraining order. There's a 14-year-old girl in danger." "Units are being dispatched to your location," the dispatcher assured him. "Please stay on the line and provide more details." Walter parked his car in an empty lot near the front gate and rushed inside, phone still pressed to his ear as he described Greg, his companions, and the situation. His eyes darted frantically around the garden until he spotted Rory and Nathan sitting on a bench near a small pond. "I've found the girl," Walter informed the dispatcher. "I'm going to get her out of here now." "Sir, you must stay." But without waiting for a response, Walter pocketed his phone and hurried toward the teens. Rory looked up in surprise as he approached, her expression quickly shifting to annoyance. "Walter, what are you doing here?" "We need to go," Walter said firmly, reaching for her hand. "Right now. I'll explain later." Rory pulled back. "No, you can't just show up and drag me away. I'm having a conversation with Nathan." "Rory, please," Walter implored, aware that every second counted. "This is serious. We need to leave immediately." Before Rory could respond, the roar of an engine shattered the peace of the garden. Walter turned to see Greg's SUV barreling down the gravel path directly toward them, crushing flower beds and narrowly missing statues as it approached. The vehicle skidded to a halt just yards away. Greg and his men leaped out, and before Walter could react, Greg charged forward and struck him in the face with a heavy blow. The cutting tool connected with Walter's temple, sending him crashing to the ground. Though dazed, Walter remained conscious, blood trickling from the wound as he struggled to regain his footing. Through blurred vision, he saw Greg's men grab Rory, who screamed and fought as they dragged her toward the SUV. Nathan stood frozen, his face a mask of confusion. "You just told me to keep her here and talk to her," he said to Greg. "What are you doing?" One of the men thrust a wad of cash into Nathan's hand. "Job done, kid. Now get lost and be quiet, or you'll regret it." Walter staggered to his feet and lunged toward Rory, desperation driving him forward, but one of the men slammed him back down. He hit the ground hard, a violent fit of coughing tearing through him. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder with every passing second. "Police!" Walter shouted, hoping to frighten Greg and his men. "They're coming!" Greg cursed, glancing at the approaching sirens. He quickly yanked up his pant leg, exposing the ankle monitor. With a few deft movements of the cutting tool, he severed the device and tossed it into the nearby bushes. "Move! Move! Move!" he barked at his men, who were already forcing a struggling Rory into the back seat of the SUV. The vehicle sped away, taking the far exit just as the first police car pulled up to the main entrance of the garden. Walter rose shakily to his feet, pressing his handkerchief to the wound on his temple. Nathan approached him cautiously. "Mr. Harmon, wait." "Stay away from me," Walter growled, his voice hard with anger and fear for Rory. "You sold her out. You'll answer to the police." Two officers approached at a run, weapons drawn. Walter pointed in the direction the SUV had fled. "They went that way. They have Rory." The officers radioed the information to their colleagues, and two police cars immediately gave chase, sirens blaring. The remaining officer stayed with Walter, requesting medical assistance and beginning to question Nathan. "Sir, what happened here?" he asked Walter, who was now sitting on a bench, fighting against the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him. Between labored breaths, Walter explained everything he had witnessed: Eleanor's betrayal, Greg's escape plan, and Nathan's apparent complicity in the scheme. "The boy was paid to bring her here," Walter concluded, glaring at Nathan. "He set her up." Nathan shook his head frantically. Yes, they paid me, but I didn't know what they were planning. I was just told to bring her to the garden, that's all. I did nothing wrong, sir." The officer took Nathan firmly by the arm. "Be quiet. You'll have plenty of time to explain at the station." He guided the boy to the police car, instructing him to wait in the back seat. Returning to Walter, the officer pulled a small evidence bag from his pocket and carefully collected the discarded ankle monitor from the bushes where Greg had thrown it. "This will help build the case against him," the officer explained. Removing a court-ordered monitoring device is a serious offense. evidence that he wasn't acting out of mental health issues, but making deliberate choices. Another officer approached, speaking into his radio. "We need additional units at the Parker residence immediately. Possible accomplice, female, late 60s or early 70s. Walter nodded, relieved that the police were taking Eleanor's involvement seriously. "I suspect she's the one who orchestrated this," he told them. "I overheard her talking with Greg. She hates Rory for some reason and was willing to pay Greg to get rid of her." The paramedics arrived soon after, cleaning and bandaging Walter's wound. "You'll need a few stitches," one of them informed him. "It's not deep, but head wounds bleed a lot." As the medical team worked, Walter couldn't stop thinking about Rory, trapped in a car with the man who had abused her, the man her own grandmother had conspired with against her. His hands trembled with a mixture of fear for the girl and rage at those who had betrayed her. "Do you think they'll catch up to them?" Walter asked the officer. "We've got multiple units in pursuit and roadblocks being set up," the officer replied. "We'll find them, sir." Walter nodded, praying the officer was right. He couldn't bear the thought of failing Rory a second time. Despite the paramedics' recommendation to go to the hospital for stitches, Walter insisted on driving himself to the police station. His wound had been cleaned and temporarily bandaged, but he was determined to give his statement to the police first. He promised to get proper medical attention afterward, agreeing only to be guided to the nurse's room at the station for a more thorough checkup. As he walked into the station, Walter immediately spotted Eleanor being led to the booking desk. Her normally impeccable appearance was disheveled, her face a mask of indignation as an officer asked for her personal information and explained the legal proceedings she was facing. Further down the corridor, Laura paced back and forth, one hand pushing a baby stroller while the other was pressed to her forehead in obvious distress. When she caught sight of Walter, her face crumpled and she started toward him, but an officer gently intercepted her. "Mrs. Carson, we need to ensure you're properly treated. There's a doctor and nurse on duty here who can attend to you before we finish your statement and allow you to speak with the other witnesses." He made his way toward the nurse's room where the officer had directed him. Inside, the doctor on duty gestured for Walter to sit as she prepared the materials for his stitches. She worked efficiently, her hands moving deftly as she cleaned the wound and performed the stitch. However, Walter's thoughts were far from the present moment. His mind kept returning to the sight of Eleanor and Laura, both facing their own battles, in the grim police station corridor. As the doctor applied the final bandage, Walter nodded his thanks, his gaze momentarily flicking back toward the chaos outside. A different officer approached Walter, gesturing toward an interview room. "Mr. Harmon, if you'll follow me, we'd like to take your statement now." Walter followed the officer into a small, stark room with a table and 4 chairs. A second officer was already seated, a recording device set up in front of him. "Before we begin," the first officer said, "I wanted to update you on the situation. We've deployed additional units to pursue Mr. Whitmore. They've been in chase for about 15 minutes now." Walter's stomach clenched with anxiety. "And Rory? Is she still with them?" The officer nodded solemnly. "Unfortunately, yes. The girl is still in their custody." Walter clenched his fists beneath the table, struggling to maintain his composure. As long as Rory remained with those men, her life was in danger. What if they decided to simply dispose of her rather than risk capture? "Now," the officer continued, "we'd like to take your formal statement about everything that happened today, starting from this morning." Walter took a deep breath and began recounting the day's events. He described noticing Rory with Nathan at school, discovering that Greg had been released on probation, and following his instincts to keep an eye on Rory at the garden. He explained in detail what he had overheard between Eleanor and Greg, including their apparent conspiracy against Rory. When Walter mentioned that neither he, Laura, nor Rory had been aware of Greg's release from custody, both officers exchanged surprised glances. "You weren't notified?" one of them asked. "The court is required to inform victims when perpetrators are released." "We had no idea," Walter confirmed. "I only found out today when I did some research online." The second officer made a note. "Our forensic team is currently searching the Parker residence. They've found a victim notification letter from the court hidden in Eleanor Parker's personal desk. It appears she deliberately concealed this information from her daughter and granddaughter." Walter shook his head in disgust. "I still don't understand why. Why would she hate her own granddaughter enough to put her back in danger?" "We hope to determine that during our interrogation," the officer replied. But before the police could finish his question about Nathan, they heard a commotion outside. "How could you?" Laura was saying, her voice breaking with emotion. "She's your granddaughter, your own flesh and blood." As the police stepped into the corridor, he witnessed an intense confrontation between Laura and Eleanor. Two officers stood nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. "How could you?" Laura was saying, her voice breaking with emotion. "She's your granddaughter, your own flesh and blood." Eleanor's face was cold, her posture rigid despite her disheveled appearance. "I hate that girl," she spat. "She looks just like her father, your first husband, that worthless man. The way she watches people quietly, always so depressed. She'll grow up to be just like him. Why do you always marry these stupid, incapable men? Even Greg, that cowhead, he can't even do his job properly." "Ma'am, that's enough," one of the officers said firmly, stepping forward. "Save it for the interrogation room. Your lawyer will be here soon." As Eleanor was led away, she caught sight of Walter. Her eyes narrowed with hatred, but she said nothing as the officers escorted her down the corridor. Laura stood frozen, her face ashen with shock at her mother's vitriol. The baby in the stroller began to cry, disturbed by the tension and raised voices. After Walter completed his statement, he was led back to the waiting area. Walter approached Laura, who was rocking the stroller back and forth in an attempt to soothe the crying infant. Her own tears fell silently, mixing with her son's louder distress. "Let me help," Walter offered gently, taking over the rocking motion so Laura could wipe her eyes. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "My own mother and Greg working together against my daughter. I know Eleanor never liked Evan, Rory's father, but I never expected—" Before Walter could respond, a commotion at the entrance of the station drew their attention. Several officers were escorting three men in handcuffs, Greg and his two accomplices. Greg's face was contorted with anger. His breathing labored as he occasionally suppressed a cough. Laura stepped forward, her body trembling with rage. "I hope they lock you up for life this time," she shouted at Greg. "No more probation for you, you monster." Greg's eyes darted to Laura, then fixed on Walter. With a sudden lunge forward, he spat a thick mixture of phlegm and saliva onto Walter's shirt. The officers immediately tightened their grip on Greg, pulling him back. "You deserve this, old man," Greg snarled. Walter remained calm, his gaze steady. "Be smarter next time, Greg." "If you get another chance—" The officers continued leading Greg and his men down the corridor toward the booking area. As they disappeared around a corner, another small group emerged, an officer guiding Nathan, who walked with his head down, shoulders slumped in defeat. Upon seeing Laura, the boy stopped. "Mrs. Carson," he said hesitantly, Could I speak to you for a moment? I want to apologize." The officer looked to Laura, who nodded stiffly. "I'm so sorry," Nathan began, his voice breaking. "They offered me money to bring Rory to the garden. At first, I thought it was just an easy way to make some cash. But then—" He swallowed hard. "As I got to know her better, I realized she wasn't a freak like everyone says. She's actually really cool, really smart. I didn't know they were going to hurt her. I swear, I didn't." Laura stared at him, her expression unreadable. "I gave all the money back to the police," Nathan added, pulling his empty pockets inside out as if to prove his point. "I don't want anything to do with it." After a long moment, Laura nodded once, acknowledging his apology without necessarily accepting it. The officer gently guided Nathan away toward an interview room. Another officer approached them, his expression grave. "Mrs. Carson, Mr. Harmon, I'm afraid I have an update about Rory from the hospital." Walter felt Laura stiffen beside him, her hand reaching out to grip his arm. "Rory has been taken to Mercy Hospital," the officer continued. "During the police chase, she attempted to escape from the moving vehicle. Her leg became entangled in a rope the kidnappers were using to restrain her, and she was dragged for a short distance before the car stopped. She struck a tree and was subsequently rolled by the momentum, narrowly avoiding being hit by the pursuing police car." Laura's knees buckled, and Walter quickly supported her weight, guiding her to a nearby chair. "How bad is it?" Walter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Multiple broken bones and a concussion," the officer replied. "The medical team has treated her, but she hasn't regained consciousness yet. She's in critical condition." Laura buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. The baby, sensing his mother's distress, began crying anew. Walter placed a comforting hand on Laura's shoulder, feeling utterly helpless in the face of such devastating news. After everything Rory had already endured, to suffer this additional trauma seemed unthinkably cruel. "I want to go to her," Laura managed between sobs. "Can I go to the hospital?" "Of course," the officer said. "We can provide a police escort if you'd like." Walter helped Laura gather her things and secure the baby in his carrier. "I'll come with you," he offered, "if that's all right." Laura nodded gratefully, squeezing his hand. "Thank you, Walter, for everything." As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Walter couldn't help but reflect on the twisted chain of events that had led to this moment. A grandmother's inexplicable hatred, a stepfather's malice, and a young boy's greed had combined to create a perfect storm of danger for Rory. Yet there had also been moments of kindness and courage. Laura's unwavering love for her daughter, Nathan's belated remorse, and perhaps, Walter hoped, his own determination to protect a child in need. Now all they could do was wait and hope that Rory would find the strength to survive this latest ordeal. The police escort guided them through the evening traffic with efficient urgency, lights flashing but sirens silent out of respect for the baby, who had finally fallen asleep after his extended crying jag. Walter sat in the back seat with Laura, who cradled her son's carrier with one arm while clutching Walter's hand with her free hand. "I should have known," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I should have seen the signs with my mother, the way she treated Rory, always so cold, so critical." "Don't blame yourself," Walter said gently. "Eleanor hid her true feelings well." Laura shook her head. "But I'm her mother. It's my job to protect her, and I've failed her over and over again. First with Greg, and now this." "You haven't failed her," Walter insisted. "You got her away from Greg. You've supported her through therapy. You've shown her love and stability. That's not failure, Laura." They fell silent as the hospital came into view, a sprawling complex of buildings illuminated against the darkening sky. The police car pulled up to the emergency entrance, and an officer opened the door for them. "A detective will meet you inside," he informed them. "They'll need to take Rory's statement when she regains consciousness." Laura nodded, her face pale but composed as she lifted the baby carrier. Walter stayed close beside her as they entered the building, navigating the maze of corridors with the help of staff until they reached the intensive care unit. Outside the unit, a doctor in surgical scrubs was waiting for them. Her name tag identified her as Dr. Chen. "Mrs. Carson?" she asked, stepping forward to meet them. "I'm Dr. Chen, the physician caring for your daughter." "How is she?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. "Rory has suffered multiple fractures and a concussion," Dr. Chen said directly. "She's past the immediate crisis, but she's still unconscious. We expect her to regain consciousness in the next few days, though she'll need extensive physical therapy due to her injuries." Laura swayed slightly, and Walter placed a steadying hand on her elbow. "Can I see her?" Laura asked. Dr. Chen nodded. Yes, but I should prepare you. She's on a ventilator to assist with her breathing, and there's significant bruising, especially on her face. Laura straightened her shoulders. I need to be with my daughter. They followed Dr. Chen into the ICU until they reached Rory's room. Laura gasped softly as they entered, her free hand flying to her mouth. Rory lay motionless in the hospital bed, connected to multiple monitors and machines. Her face was swollen and discolored with bruises, and a ventilator tube protruded from her mouth. Her arms and one leg were encased in casts, and what was visible of her skin was either bandaged or marked with angry abrasions. Laura approached the bed slowly, setting the baby carrier on a nearby chair before gently taking Rory's uninjured hand in hers. I'm here, sweetheart, she whispered. Mom's right here. You're safe now. Walter stood back, giving mother and daughter a moment of privacy. The beeping of the monitors created a strange rhythm in the otherwise quiet room, a constant reminder of how precarious Rory's condition was. As they stood vigil, a nurse entered the room. Excuse me, but we heard the patient mumbling something a few minutes ago. She was asking for her letter. Letter? Laura repeated, confused. The nurse nodded. She was quite insistent, even in her semi-conscious state. My letter? Need my letter? Does that mean anything to you? Walter suddenly remembered. The letter from Nathan, the one he left on her bus seat today. She must have it in her backpack or pocket. The nurse retrieved a plastic bag containing Rory's personal effects, which had been removed when she was admitted. Inside, they found a crumpled envelope, the paper stained with dirt and what looked like blood. May I? Laura asked, her hand hovering over the bag. The nurse nodded, and Laura carefully extracted the letter. As she unfolded it, her eyes filled with fresh tears, but these seemed different from the ones she had shed earlier. Oh, she breathed, reading the teenage boy's awkward handwriting. After a moment, she handed the letter to Walter. It's not what we thought, she said softly. Walter adjusted his glasses and read, then he lowered the letter, his heart heavy with the realization that what might have been Rory's first genuine friendship had been corrupted by Eleanor and Greg's twisted scheme. They had preyed on Nathan's youth and greed, turning what could have been a positive connection for Rory into yet another betrayal. Even if his intentions became better over time, Walter said quietly, he still took money to lead her into a trap. Laura nodded, her expression conflicted. I know, but at least she got to read this first, to know that someone at school might actually like her for herself. She carefully folded the letter and placed it on Rory's bedside table where she might see it when she woke up. We need to rebuild our family after this, Laura said eventually. Without my mother, without the constant fear. She looked down at her sleeping daughter. I want Rory to feel safe and loved. I want her to have a normal teenage life with friends and crushes and all the ordinary problems kids are supposed to have. She will, Walter assured her. It will take time, but she'll get there. As Walter gazed through the window at Rory's still form, he reflected on everything that had transpired since that first day he noticed her crying on his bus. This case had taught them all painful lessons about neglect and the importance of protecting those most vulnerable. But it had also demonstrated the power of vigilance, of one person refusing to look away when they suspected a child was in danger. He might be just a school bus driver, but he had made a difference in Rory's life, perhaps even saved it. And in doing so, he had been reminded of a truth he had always known, but sometimes forgotten, that each of us has the power to change a life for the better, if only we pay attention and have the courage to act.